Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Mr. Menopause Show. Now, today we are diving into a crucial topic: vaginal health during menopause. And here to share her expertise is Kim Vopni, also known as the Vagina Coach. Now, Kim is a leading expert in pelvic floor fitness and wellness, a Mr. Menopause approved provider, and a valued contributor to Tafiq TV. So, whether you're new to symptoms or have been managing them for years, I'm excited to have Kim share her insights. I'm Tafiq Akhir, and this is the Mr. Menopause Show. Hello, everyone, and hello, Kim. I'm so excited to have you here just to share your expertise. And you know what? I would just really love to dive right in if that's okay. So, can you just please share the background history of the Vagina Coach and how you got started in pelvic floor health?
When I was in sixth grade, I saw a childbirth video as part of our sexual health education, and it planted a seed of a bit of fear and a bit of fascination. And so I grew up afraid of childbirth. And unbeknownst to me, I had no idea what the pelvic floor was. But years and years down the road, I did watch my mom suffer from incontinence, chronic back pain. She had a hysterectomy. And so there was a picture painted for me early on that pregnancy and childbirth are a little bit disruptive to the pelvic floor. Again, at the time, I didn't know the term pelvic floor, but to the part of the body that at the time I just thought of it as our vagina. That's it. And then when I grew up and got married, started a family, when I was pregnant the first time, I really was determined to have a different story than my mom. And my midwives had recommended a product to me called the which is a biofeedback device that is a pelvic floor trainer. So that was sort of my first introduction to the term pelvic floor. I was starting to learn that it was a group of muscles, and I used it. I had a great experience. And then I thought, well, why is it that more people are not aware of this and using this product? And so that's kind of where it started, with the seed planted much earlier in life. And I started an e-commerce store. I started selling this product. I started adding other pelvic health products to the site. I then had pelvic health physical therapists referring to me. And at that point, I had never heard of a pelvic floor physical therapist. So I learned about them and started shouting from the rooftops that everybody should be seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist. And what they do is internal evaluation and treatment. And what I was doing and recognizing a missed need is exercise. So while the pelvic floor physical therapists do teach pelvic floor exercise, it's usually viewed as kind of just Kegels or boring, or it's physio exercises. And I wanted to start applying other fitness principles to this group of muscles called the pelvic floor. And so being a personal trainer and using fitness principles for the rest of our body, for all of the other muscles that we have, why were we not doing the same for our pelvic floor? And so the Vagina Coach sort of evolved from that beginning into, I'm a personal trainer. I have a real passion for the pelvic floor. It's this really, I think, undervalued part of our body that does really important things. And when we apply fitness principles to it, we can prevent and overcome some of the main pelvic floor dysfunctions like incontinence and prolapse and chronic back pain.
Wow, that's so interesting. Everything just seems to be connected, right? Why is vaginal health in particular so important during menopause? And what are some common challenges or issues that women may face during this stage of life?
I started out working primarily with pregnant women and new moms. And then as my businesses were growing, I was then starting to transition into perimenopause, now postmenopause. And I recognized that the conversation about pelvic health is not just do your Kegels in pregnancy and call it a day. Pelvic floor dysfunction can influence and affect anybody, even if you've never been pregnant. And menopause is a time when symptoms can show up for the first time, or symptoms that might have just been kind of a little bit of a naggy, bothersome issue now become a much bigger issue. And a lot of that has to do with the decline of estrogen. So the hormonal piece is what can exacerbate existing symptoms or potentially bring them on for the first time. So we have age-related muscle and strength loss. We have collagen loss. We have hyaluronic acid loss. All of those things are contributing factors the estrogen is almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. So once we lose the estrogen, we now have a change to the pH in our vagina. So we become much more prone to UTIs and other infections. We may have atrophy of some of the tissues. So even some retraction of some of the tissues around the clitoris, around the urethra, also can decrease our capacity for pleasure and again, increase risk of infection. It often, low estrogen contributes to urgency, urinary frequency, burning, irritation, itchiness, painful sex, dryness, some bleeding sometimes for some people. And so it's knowing that this is coming. It's sort of, if I reflect back to starting with working with pregnant women, trying to get them to prevent or intervene so that we could do our best to mitigate some of these conditions and problems. The same as with menopause. If we are given information earlier on, knowing that the changes are what is happening as we transition to menopause, we can step in with potentially collagen. We can step in with hyaluronic acid vaginal moisturizers. We can step in with vaginal estrogen. More and more research really points to, it's almost, I call it like an essential nutrient from the age of 45 onwards, and not waiting until we have a problem, but stepping in ahead of time so that we can preserve the function and the tissue integrity while we're also doing our pelvic floor exercise, because that also helps with blood flow and circulation and keeping the muscles themselves resilient. Estrogen also does play a role, though, in our muscle strength and synthesis of our muscle fibers. So it's really, really important. The other piece is, as we menopause and aging are associated with more type 2 muscle fiber loss. And type 2 muscle fibers are quick contract release muscle fibers. So we think of type 1 fibers are sort of our endurance marathon runners, and type 2 fibers are sort of the sprinters. And knowing that things like stress urinary incontinence, where we laugh, cough, sneeze with some sort of exertion, there's a bit of leaking, those are the quick react muscle fibers. And knowing that we are losing more of those, we have evidence to show that age and menopause are associated with a greater type 2 fiber loss. Again, if we can intervene with resistance training and fitness principles to train the pelvic floor, we can't 100% prevent that, but we can mitigate that risk, and rather than just sitting there and accepting that that's just what happens when you get older.
Now, can you explain what role the pelvic floor plays in maintaining vaginal health during menopause and how changes in the pelvic floor can actually impact overall well-being?
The pelvic floor is a group of muscles that closes off the base of the pelvis. It's the foundation of our core. Most of us have all heard of core exercise and core fitness. And the pelvic floor has really been left out of that conversation. And so its roles, it's the jobs of the pelvic floor. One is pelvic and spinal control and stability, so our core control, maintaining organ support, bladder, uterus, rectum, continence, so managing whether we want pee, poo, or fart to come out or stay in. We need to be able to make that decision of what wants to come out and is it a good appropriate time for it to come out or not, and control that. Sexual response is another function of the pelvic floor. And so these are really important jobs that we don't really know. We've never been taught that. And when the pelvic floor is working optimally, great. We don't have any bother. We're fine. But as soon as something's not working optimally, all of a sudden it's one of the only things that we think about, because it's so central to so many parts of our life. We may have chronic back pain. We have one published, there's lots of research, but one more recent study, a Canadian study by Dr. Sinead Dufour, highlighting that 95% of women with low back pain have some form of pelvic floor dysfunction. And we often will see chiropractors or physios or massage therapy, which can all absolutely be beneficial, but often the pelvic floor is the missing link to chronic back pain. So when we understand the importance of that group of muscles, and then we understand the principles that we were stating earlier, such as age-related muscle and strength loss, we can intervene with pelvic floor muscle training and resistance training from like a whole body approach is really my bias, I would say. And we need to consider, as we were talking earlier, with regards to the tissue changes. So estrogen, so potentially vaginal moisturizer, vaginal estrogen, lubricant for sexual activity, and then pelvic floor muscle training. So we have loads of evidence to demonstrate that pelvic floor muscle training, so people think of Kegels, that's one form of pelvic floor muscle training. We have loads of evidence to show that it is effective when it's done correctly and when it's done consistently. We have more recent evidence that supports my bias, which is that when we layer in pelvic floor muscle training with resistance training, we can get quicker results, we can get better results. And often what I see is we get a little bit more compliance, because it's not that we have to, oh, I've got to go do my Kegel practice now, and then I can go do my workout. We can combine the two together to get more bang for our buck. So as we're approaching menopause, knowing that we have other increased risks like heart disease, we have an increased risk of bone loss, we can use this whole body approach not only to help optimize this really important group of muscles that stabilize our core, hold our organs, manage our continence, contribute to sexual function, but we are also building our bones and brains and hearts and all the other things that we need.
And again, that just goes back to what I said earlier. Everything is connected. Wow. Now, in what ways does vaginal estrogen serve as an essential nutrient during menopause, and what benefits does it offer in terms of maintaining vaginal health?
So estrogen is, we have estrogen receptors all throughout our body, and we have tissues in the vagina full of estrogen receptors. We have estrogen receptors around the bladder. They're all over the place. And when we no longer have circulating estrogen, when we're no longer producing it, these tissues become thinner and drier. They're a little less supple. They can become irritated. And as we mentioned, they're more prone to infection. They may be prone to disruption because of the thinning and drying. So anytime there's something inserted, that could be a finger, a toy, a penis, a pessary. So a pessary is something that a lot of women will use for pelvic organ support if they have something called a pelvic organ prolapse. There are some that are designed for stress urinary incontinence as well. So if we have somebody using something like that, which are really helpful tools, however, they have thin, dry tissue that's lacking estrogen, that insertion and removal, especially if it's every single day, is really going to be disruptive to the tissues itself. A lot of pain, burning, irritation, some bleeding for people, and again, can increase infection. So estrogen really is applied locally. So there's different forms of estrogen as a hormone therapy, and we're talking specific to vaginal estrogen. So localized vaginal estrogen, specifically estradiol. We have different forms of estrogen in our body. Estriol is the one that's most prominent if we are ever pregnant. That's when we're producing the most estriol. Estradiol, or E2, as it's called, is our most potent form of estrogen. And estrone is the more inflammatory. It's actually produced from our fat tissue. So estradiol is the one that I would say is used most in research and is the one that will contribute to the biggest change and is in most of the estrogen hormone therapies. And this can be in the form of a pill, like a little tablet that is inserted into the vagina. It can be in the form of a cream that is applied internally and externally. So we need to remember it's not just inside the vagina, it's also around the labia, around the clitoris as well, which is the downfall of the tablet, doesn't quite reach there. And then there's also something called the E-string, which is almost like a mini pessary that is inserted and left in, and it's a slow release over time. So people can choose their preferred dosing strategy. The dose will be dependent on what the doctor prescribes for you. However, the delivery method may be something that, and there are some people that may even use a combo approach. They might use the tablet and a little bit of cream externally. So there's lots of options there. That's the estrogen piece. Then there's also vaginal DHEA. DHEA is non-hormonal. However, it helps convert to estrogen and testosterone, which can also be another benefit. And again, some people use estrogen and vaginal DHEA. So working with a practitioner who's well versed in hormone therapies and also pelvic health is really beneficial. There's some over-the-counter creams in the United States, not as much in Canada. We do need a prescription in Canada. Naturopathic doctors can often prescribe this as well. So there's lots of options people have in order to have access to estrogen. But I guess the main points are reduction of UTIs, keeping the vaginal pH optimal to reduce the risks of infection, and allowing the tissues to maintain their suppleness, their juiciness, their capacity for managing things like the increased pressure and the urinary symptoms that some people have. The estrogen comes in and helps offset a lot of those. So it makes it the pelvic floor more resilient to all the other challenges that we may face as we're aging.
Now, going back to some of the holistic things that women can do, like Kegels, you had mentioned some approaches that you actually like to add in your training program. So, what other interventions do you recommend to support and promote vaginal health, especially for women experiencing menopause?
One thing that I would say I consider it, again, like one of the most underused women's health resources that we have is pelvic floor physical therapy. And I think that if we all would see a pelvic floor physical therapist once a year, it would go a long way for helping prevent and mitigate a lot of the challenges that we experience, but also help overcome them as well. So that's one component. We then need to have some sort of regimen in place. So we talked about the tissue support with vaginal estrogen can be really helpful, vaginal moisturizers, lubricant for sexual activity. But then we want to have the pelvic floor muscle piece in there. And Kegels are one. So Kegels are a voluntary contract, lift, and release of the pelvic floor. And if we look at gold standard research, a lot of it is 3 sets of 10-second holds done 3 times a day. And I don't know many people who have the time to dedicate 3 sets of 10-second holds 3 times a day, especially for not the most exhilarating exercise in the world. So if we can combine it with other exercise, so again, looking at what research has suggested with resistance training and whole body movement. So things like pelvic tilts and bridges. There was also some research that was looking at the pelvic floor not working in isolation and what other muscles are working in conjunction or in coordination with the pelvic floor. So we have our inner thighs, the adductors, we have our glutes, and we have our deep abdominals, the transversus. And so this one piece of research was looking at Kegels alone compared to movements that incorporate the inner thighs and the glutes and the transversus as well. There was a heightened response, so better results, essentially. So if we can find ways to incorporate tools and props, so an example could be laying on the back. We're going to go into a bridge pose. We have a small squishy ball or a cushion or a yoga block in between our thighs. We would inhale. So as we inhale, our pelvic floor lengthens, and as we exhale, the pelvic floor contracts and lifts. So we want to harness that relationship of the pelvic floor and the diaphragm. And if we're going to go into movement, we would exhale, activate the pelvic floor with some sort of a cue. A lot of people resonate with picking up a blueberry with your vagina and your anus, imagining that, not actually doing that. So you exhale, imagine picking up your blueberries, and then lift your bum up into the bridge. Simultaneously, you're also applying a gentle squeeze of that ball or that block that you have in between your thighs. So we're leveraging the inner thighs. The bridge is activating the glutes. The deep abdominals, the transversus, are co-contracting when we have that pelvic floor activation. So we're kind of getting a lot of bang for our buck in that exercise. And that's just an example of what I call buff muff exercises, where we are not just sitting and doing 3 sets of 10-second holds 3 times a day. We're actually training the pelvic floor dynamically, because a lot of the symptoms or the challenges people face, like heaviness or pressure or leaking, aren't happening when we're sitting. They're happening when we are exercising or when we are lifting something off the floor, pushing a heavy door open, standing up from a chair. So when we can retrain the reaction time of the pelvic floor and then bring exercise that is building capacity and strength, endurance into that muscle group as well, we are getting quicker results, we're getting better results, and we're getting more long-lasting results.
That is so amazing. And you know what? I think that is the perfect way to segue to some final words. So, is there anything that you'd like to share about vaginal health during menopause before we go?
I think it's important to note that it's never too late. So if somebody is well past, well into their menopause, and they may have even been suffering for years, there can often be a lot of resentment and why didn't anybody tell me this before? But that doesn't mean that we can't still intervene and make change. It's absolutely never too late to start pelvic floor muscle training, to see a pelvic floor physical therapist, to start using vaginal estrogen, to start moisturizing your vagina, to use lubricant as a way to help allow for better intimacy and less pain and discomfort. So it's not something that happens overnight. And usually, if there's been years of suffering and change, it might take a little bit longer to overcome those. But I think it's important for people to know that it's absolutely never too late. The sooner we can intervene, the better. So if you're listening and you're perimenopause and moving towards your transition, know that you can start making some change now. But if you are past and well into your menopause, these are all things that can help alleviate things that you may have been suffering with for a long time and make a tremendous change.
Oh my goodness, that was so good. And you know what? This is such a needed information and awareness that women who are struggling with this area can actually learn from and just feel more empowered by knowing that there is hope and there are alternative solutions out there that can help. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise. It is greatly appreciated. And also, I want to thank all of you for watching. And if you'd like to connect with Kim Vopni, the Vagina Coach, head over to her website, vaginacoach.com. She is a highly recommended Mr. Menopause approved specialist. And if you are struggling in this area, you should go to her site and check things out for yourself. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you get value from my videos, and this will help to keep the videos active in the feed. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe and be well.
Are you entering menopause or currently experiencing it? If the answer is yes, don't let menopause hold you back another moment. Take the first step in controlling your long-term health and vitality with Mr. Menopause's complimentary Menopause Awareness Assessment. If you feel confused, anxious, or overwhelmed by menopause, Mr. Menopause is a champion for women's health and provides unwavering support. He knows that our level of menopause awareness will determine whether we thrive through menopause or barely survive it. Scan the QR code on the screen or go to mrmenopause.com. That's mrmenopause.com and simply answer 20 quick questions to receive personalized insights about your level of menopause awareness that can help empower you to confidently take control of your menopause journey and improve your overall quality of life. Take the assessment to find out your level of menopause awareness today.